We're diving into, well, a real high-stakes chess match today. And the pieces, they're tiny rocks, minerals actually, that power basically our entire modern world.
That's right. China's recent move, restricting the export of rare earth elements, REs, it sent this strategic shockwave, really, through global markets.
Yeah, analysts are saying it's not just, an economic tweak. It feels much more like a perfectly calibrated geopolitical counterpunch.
Exactly. And the immediate question for you listening is probably, okay, how is this restriction structured? And maybe more importantly, why did China pull this trigger now?
Right, so our mission here is to unpack that timing, dig into the really deep differences in how the U.S. and Chinese systems actually make policy.
Which is fascinating in itself.
Totally. And then explore some of these high-level ideas, these blueprints people are proposing to, well, pull the global economy out of what our sources calling the trade trap.
But before we jump into all the geopolitics, let's just quickly define our terms. What exactly are rare earth elements? Why are they so critical?
Good point. What are we actually talking about here?
So we're looking at 17 specific critical minerals. You might hear names like neodymium, dysprosium, terbium. They sound obscure, but they are, the magnetic heart of 21st century tech.
Okay.
Think powerful magnets in EV motors, precision guidance systems for defense, and of course the chips inside your smartphone, your computers. They're essential for all of it.
So literally underpinning the green economy, the digital economy, everything.
Everything. And here's the kicker, the choke point. China refines something like over 80% of the world's entire supply.
80%. Wow.
Yeah. That kind of concentration, it gives them just massive, immediate leverage over pretty much any country aiming to lead in EVs, clean energy, or significantly AI.
And the symmetry of this conflict, it's almost, brutal. The U.S. restricts those advanced semiconductors going to China.
Right, aiming squarely at China's ability to advance in high-end AI.
And then China turns around and blocks the very materials needed to make those semiconductors in the first place.
It's like throwing sand in the gears, isn't it? It really is. Direct action, direct reaction. The U.S. blocks the sophisticated digital brains, the chips, and China hits back by restricting the raw ingredients. It turns basic materials into, well, strategic weapons in this trade war.
Okay, so here's where the timing gets really interesting, maybe even strategically brilliant based on what we're reading. This restriction didn't just happen randomly.
No, not at all. It landed almost perfectly, timed precisely with a critical legal challenge hitting the U.S. Supreme Court docket.
That's the really clever part, isn't it? Just as China makes this move, the Supreme Court is gearing up to hear this massive challenge to those big tariffs imposed on Chinese imports a while back.
Exactly. And lower courts had already flagged those tariffs as potentially unconstitutional, an executive overreach, basically.
Let's pause on that. Why unconstitutional? What was the specific legal argument there? People might wonder.
Yeah, it boils down to the separation of powers between the president and Congress. The argument is that the president's use of certain trade laws, like Section 301, went beyond executing the law and essentially became making law.
Okay. Congress holds the power to regulate international commerce, set tariffs. So when the executive branch put these sweeping, long-term tariffs in place without arguably clear enough delegation from Congress, it looked like stepping over that constitutional line.
So China's move, intentionally or not, injects this raw economic pressure right into the American system.
Precisely.
Potentially influencing the atmosphere around the judiciary, just as it's deciding the legality of the existing trade war architecture.
You got it. And that pressure hits home immediately for you, the consumer.
Yeah.
Think about it heading into the holiday shopping season. If these RE supply chains seize up,
right,
American shoppers could face, well, the specter of empty shelves, as one source put it. Higher prices for electronics, toys, household goods. It makes the constitutional debate suddenly very real at the checkout counter.
And it's not just about consumer goods, is it? The real high-value target seems to be the tech sector itself. That whole AI supercycle, companies like NVIDIA, they depend heavily on these RE magnets and materials. Absolutely. A sustained chokehold could inject huge volatility, potentially cool down that really feverish momentum in the U.S. AI sector. Analysts are pretty clear. This kind of supply chain vulnerability puts America's AI leadership directly at risk.
So this really puts the Supreme Court in an incredible position, a historic crossroads.
Yeah.
If they decide to uphold the tariffs, even with these legal questions swirling, what message does that send?
It's a huge signal, globally. Upholding them would basically say economic nationalism, maybe even trade conflict, Trump's constitutional restraint. Our sources term this the partisan endorsement scenario.
And that means?
It likely accelerates a full-scale decoupling. It cements this fracture into two competing global tech ecosystems. Essentially, the gloves are fully off.
But the other path, if they strike the tariffs down, the immediate reversal scenario.
That changes the game completely. It could restore some faith in judicial neutrality, provide a massive off-ramp for this whole conflict if those tariffs are suddenly ruled illegal, have to be rolled back.
It opens the door for de-escalation.
Exactly. It could lead to trade stabilization. China might then, ease its own REE curbs in response. Suddenly, global economic stability seems tied to American judicial independence. It's quite a link.
It really is. A constitutional fight over tariffs getting leveraged globally by a mineral export ban.
Wow. Okay, this brings us neatly to that core systemic difference you mentioned earlier, the contrast between China's surprise move and the often drawn-out process in the U.S.
Right. The shock wasn't just what China restricted, but how they did it. So seamless, so coordinated, totally leak-free. That speaks volumes about the operational efficiency of the Chinese committee system.
How does that system work differently in a situation like this?
Well, it's fundamentally built for centralized speed and alignment. The party, the government, industry, they're all incentivized to get on the same page, fast.
Okay.
So you get unified direction, swift execution, and absolute message discipline. Ideas get stress-tested internally within the committee, then launched with full institutional force. This enables what some call strategy by surprise. They keep their options open, keep adversaries guessing, and then move quickly.
That's it. They pay their consensus cost internally, behind closed doors. They handle the complexity privately, then present this consolidated, powerful decision externally. It maximizes their bargaining power through, opacity, and it really shrinks the response time for everyone else.
Whereas the U.S. system sometimes feels like policy made through public argument, almost like theater.
That's often how it's described, yeah. The American committee problem. It often leads to diffusion, delay. Our system is designed to be pluralistic, adversarial. You've got the White House, Congress, courts, media, lobbyists, all weighing in, often with veto power.
So we pay that consensus cost up front, out in the open, with all the headline risk that involves.
Exactly. Policymaking becomes this public spectacle before the policy is even finalized. It can lead to dilution, delays, hence that old joke. A camel is just a horse designed by committee.
Right.
The U.S. can suffer from this committee fatigue, while China leverages its procedural discipline.
So the big takeaway for any multinational listening might be, you need two different risk strategies. For China, brace for rapid, tightly controlled surprises.
Budget for event risk.
And for the U.S., plan for managing messy, public, drawn-out process risk.
That's the critical distinction, I think, for navigating this new geoeconomic landscape.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We've talked a lot about the conflict, the differences. What about ways forward? How do we get beyond this cycle of escalation? The sources talk about escaping the trade trap.
Yeah, and it's an important distinction they make. Many worry about the Thucydides trap, the idea of an inevitable military clash, maybe over Taiwan.
Right.
But these sources suggest the more immediate, persistent danger is this trade trap, a sort of perpetual low-grade war fought with tariffs, sanctions, export controls.
So how do we escape that?
Well, the argument is the current global trade architecture, the World Trade Organization, it was designed for the 90s, for an analog world. It's kind of obsolete now. We need a global trade architecture 2.0.
And the core idea behind this Trade 2.0 isn't about one side winning.
No, it's about recognizing interdependence. It has to shift from the zero-sum mindset to more of a joint systems approach. The reality is, decoupling is destabilizing for everyone. It harms both sides.
So what would this new system look like? Tech-driven, you mentioned.
Definitely. Think about using things like blockchain for transparent transactions, immutable digital receipts, essentially, or integrating smart contracts to automatically ensure compliance with, say, labor standards or environmental rules.
Moving from sanctions to standards, is that the idea?
Right.
Which implies both sides need to change their habits?
Oh, absolutely. The U.S., for instance, probably needs to step back from the heavy overuse of unilateral extraterritorial sanctions, punishing third countries. It's become almost a primary tool of foreign policy.
And China.
On China's side, the focus would be on much greater transparency, particularly around industrial subsidies and really significant improvements in intellectual property protection and practices. The goal is multilateral standards for digital trade, AI, data replacing unilateral punishment with shared rules and accountability.
There's a really interesting, almost practical example in the source material about how this shared responsibility could actually work using the fentanyl and guns crisis.
Yeah, the symmetry there is quite stark and tragic. You have Chinese-made precursor chemicals contributing to the opioid crisis killing Americans,
Hmm.
and American-made firearms flowing south, arming cartels, killing Mexicans. Both are huge problems, arguably preventable with better cooperation.
So what's the proposed tech solution there?
A joint U.S. China Mexico initiative. The idea is to use end-to-end blockchain tracking for both chemical and firearm supply chains.
Creating an unforgeable record of where things go.
Exactly. And crucially, deploying AI analytics on top of that to scan logistics data, shipping manifests, looking for illicit pattern spotting when a legitimate shipment suddenly goes off-route or disappears. It's applied tech diplomacy for a shared, painful problem.
And the thinking is, if they can align on something like deadly chemicals and guns, maybe they can align on advanced semiconductors down the line,
That's the hope.
which inevitably brings us to the biggest flashpoint: Taiwan. The sources seem to argue the answer there isn't aggression, but imagination, starting with just preserving the current fragile situation.
Right. Stability across the Taiwan Strait is seen as the absolute bedrock for any functioning Trade 2.0 system. The key idea proposed is institutionalizing a kind of perpetual peace process, not solving it overnight, but managing it to buffer against miscalculation.
And that involves things like confidence-building measures, CBMs.
Exactly. What are CBMs? They're practical steps to lower hostility and actually increase interdependence. Things like reliable military hotlines to prevent accidental clashes. Shared academic projects on global challenges like climate change, maybe even joint economic zones that make stability the obvious, profitable choice for businesses on all sides. The current status quo is definitely fragile, but the sources argue it's incredibly valuable and needs reinforcing.
You know, this whole deep dive really highlights the power of process, maybe even more than just brute force or resources. China's REE move was, in a way, a masterclass in timing and leverage.
Absolutely. And it exposed vulnerabilities in U.S. supply chains, but also potentially in the politicization of its own legal system.
And that fundamental difference in how power is projected, it seems to come down to how decisions get made. China's procedural discipline, that ability for unified surprise.
Versus America's often very public, sometimes exhausting procedural gauntlet, that committee fatigue we talked about.
Which suggests the real front line of this 21st century competition. Maybe it is in Taiwan, not directly, not yet anyway, but the very rules and architecture of the global economy itself.
I think that's right. So the final thought, perhaps, for you to mull over. We've seen that maybe the ultimate test of national strength in this new geoeconomic era isn't just military power or even sheer economic size,
What?
but the ability to match decision quality with decision tempo, speed, and effectiveness. So if the U.S. system continues to struggle with that public committee fatigue, if it's always debating the rules while others are writing them, can it genuinely lead the way in designing this Trade 2.0?
Or will that initiative be grabbed by systems that can act more quickly, more decisively, maybe more opaquely? That really is the question that could define the next decade of global power.